Hey, it's Mazzy. This video is dropping on election day morning, but you're probably watching it much later. But these are the 25 best American bands. Now, there's a thread going around YouTube. I believe it was started by Glenn Kellaway, a Canadian in the basement. Well, his channel's called In the Basement, and he started. So I thank an outsider, someone from up yonder, to celebrate our country with some bands. And then I saw Lost Mixtape, Todd's channel did about a dozen or 15 bands. The Long Cut Chris do about 15 bands. Then there was Vinyl Richie doing 25 bands, and Digital Gramophone doing about 15. So there's no rules. The great thing about making videos and showcasing these wonderful records and opinions is just that. It's an opinion. It's in the moment. Now, the best bands, our favorite bands, it's so subjective and generational too. So I picked 25 bands, and I will rank them from 25 to 1. And I didn't have a lot of problems. I actually just went through my collection and pulled bands. Now, there were some, initially I pulled 30 and I got rid of 5. And the rules, which again are not rules, are we decided collectively as a group, or the people who worked on this before me, that people like Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, we're not including them. Those maybe would be in a separate solo artist video. We're not doing vocal groups. There's probably some other things that I'll think of down the line too that we're not including. And I know it always happens. In fact, I read a few comments on some of these other videos, and you forgot this. Now, I didn't forget that. They didn't forget that. They just didn't include that. And again, you make your list. You can list it below, or you can make your own video. So I'm coming from a perspective of my age and my time, and these groups, in some cases, really influenced other bands beyond. Maybe they weren't as successful on their own, but they really were important in expanding the rock and roll genre and being very creative. I'm a fan of a lot of British artists, maybe more so than American artists. I don't know. It might be equal, but let's go. Coming at number 25, this one probably might come to a surprise, but one of the big acts in the UK pre-Beatles was the Shadows, and Hank Marvin and the Shadows, instrumental group, great thing. America's version were the Ventures. And one of the early groups I got into, of course, I remember picking this record up partially because of the cover, but great instrumentals. And a lot of the songs that the groups in the UK did, the instrumental groups, the Shadows, they would do, like Walk Don't Run, Apache Telstar. But this has, obviously songs like Pipeline, At a Time, Tequila, The Lonely, but great kind of twangy electric guitar instrumental versions. American all the way, American as apple pie. Our version of the Shadows coming at number 25, and just great fun things. They made so many, I think they probably made at least 100 records, maybe more. Coming in at number 4, a very favorite band of mine, especially this record, had a great run of hit singles in the 60s. Blue-Eyed Soul, a wonderful band. They don't get thought about a lot today, but that's the Young Rascals. This is Groovin'. Groovin' was one of the greatest summer songs of 1967. This whole album is wonderful. Now, the albums I picked here aren't necessarily the best of these artists. They're just records that I grabbed I wanted to showcase here. So this is Groovin' number 24, the Young Rascals out of the East Coast. Coming in at number 23, a band that's very influential and very esoteric, created some of the electric noise things out of the East Coast, and that is Sonic Youth. And very creative, very original, came out of the kind of the downtown scene as well in New York and Brooklyn. Got signed to a big label. In this case, I think they got signed to the David Geffen Company, but a lot of their stuff is independent. Very influential band of sound, modern psychedelia, post-punk noise stuff. And this is their album Goo. I just thought this is a great cover and illustrates this band really well. I've seen them 3 times over the years, from their earlier days till them on a major tour at the Cow Palace, opening up for Neil Young. where a bunch of people booed and kind of walked out during their set. Neil Young loved that, the whole Godfather of Grunge period. And some of his fans just weren't happy. All they want is Harvest, and they were getting screechy Sonic Youth, loud feedback albums, music. Coming at number 22, Funkadelic. Now, Funkadelic, I'm going to merge Funkadelic and Parliament and George Clinton and the whole Funkadelic scene and great electric guitar work here. This is, the most famous thing here, Maggot Brain. It's some great psychedelic crossover, funky soul music. But any of the stuff they did later when they became Parliament Funkadelic hybrid would be a part of this. But you can't argue the great rockin' thing of and soulful rock and psychedelic-y thing of Funkadelic and especially Maggot Brain. But any of their records are crazy. Number 21. The band that people love to hate, but I'm sorry, you can't do 25 great American records without including the Eagles. And I like the Eagles, but they're a band you like to hate. There's a couple of members that are punchable face people for a lot of reasons. Had hit records. Of course, their greatest hits is one of the biggest selling albums of all time. But that's not why you include a group. But they really represented America at a time. I like the first, 3-4 records. What's great about this is Joe Walsh comes in and gives it this grit and angst that they were missing on the first few records. But, they didn't start country rock, but they made it popular and made it safe. But they were a great band, and they were the backup band for Linda Ronstadt first. And so they were a tight band of musicians in Los Angeles, and they really expanded the whole LA scene at the time with Jackson Browne and J.D. Souther, and that whole scene was really important. The LA 70s, perfectly recorded records. But Hotel California is a great record, whether you like it or not. Easy band to knock. Easy for people, the hipsters to say how terrible they are, but they make great records. Maybe you can't listen to them as much, and they're all over the radio, but they're a great fucking band. Coming at number 20, I think a band that was so original and so different and actually crossed over on the charts during the MTV days from Akron, Ohio, Devo. And this is their debut. I had gotten some of their independent singles, Homo erectus, no, homo sapien, homo, whatever it's homo, is it on here? Whatever it is. And then their version of the Stones' Satisfaction. I saw them at the Mabuhay Gardens, the Fab Mad, the Punk Club. They're not really a punk band, but they're an art band and electronic band, and they're quirky with their costumes and everything. Devo is an important artist. So this is number 20, Devo. Coming at number 19, Nirvana. I mean, this is the debut album, Bleach. They get signed to a major label also. To me, they represent the best of grunge. Now, being in Seattle now for 10 years, I'm surrounded by grunge fans and grunge music. The band in Seattle to this day is Pearl Jam. They're essentially like a sports team. They're bigger almost than the sports team, the football team here, or the baseball team. They're like the home team. I'm not a huge fan of all the grunge bands. I'm not a big fan of that gnarly kind of vocal style, but I like Kurt Cobain's voice. He, came kind of south of Seattle, but it's part of the great Northwest thing. They kind of opened the doors for a lot of bands. Although I almost thought about putting Mudhoney instead of this. I didn't have to do it instead of, but when you're only doing 25, you have to limit yourself at some point. But, Teen Spirit really broke and changed the whole record industry and music industry. And it got it out of sort of that 80s doldrums, even though that was the 92 or so. This came out on Sub Pop, a Seattle label. And of course, Geffen buys the contract out, keeps this one. But this is their first album. Is it their best album? I don't know. I like In Utero too. Those three great albums, plus the MTV albums. Coming in at number 18, one of the great bands that really never also quite made it, became a cult band, but I think one of the great American rock and roll bands, and interesting stories for a lot of reason, is The Replacements from Minneapolis. And this is their album, Let It Be. This is an original copy that was on Twin Tone, the Minneapolis label. They get picked up by Warner Reprise, and they do some great albums like Tim and Pleased to Meet You, some great stuff. This is a wonderful album. This might be a good entry period, although I really like Tim a lot. Tempestuous band, a great quartet, a great tight, not even post-punk, almost like proto grunge. I mean, just a great rock and roll band. You know, Tempestuous Times, saw them a couple times in the early days and some wild concerts, and you know, they really kind of shook up the clubs that they played in when they played around. Coming at number 17, to me, a band, CBGB scene in New York City. Probably the band that became the biggest band, or one of the two largest bands, and I think is an important band led by Deborah Harry, and that's Blondie. This happens to be obviously parallel lines with Hanging on the Telephone, One Way or Another, Pretty Baby, Sunday Girl. You know, they would go and do rap and kind of disco stuff later on, these albums produced by Mike Chapman. But this is the one that just epitomized what they were about to begin with. I love all their albums. What is it, 5, 6 albums they made? Great band out of that New York scene, the club scene, the dance thing. But first, you know, the CBGB scene with all those great bands. I could have included 5 bands from that era and that time, and all very, very different, like Television. What a great band. I didn't include them this time. Next, coming in at number 16 from Los Angeles, California, possibly my favorite punk band, and that's X. I believe this is their third album, The New World. It just seems more fun in The New World. The third album produced by The Doors, Ray Manzarek. Their first album, to me, is a perfect album, but all their albums. What's great about them in terms of the punk scene, they really crossed over and brought some what we now call Americana in, some rootsy side, kind of like a folk punk band, but they have a great energy, and they're playing to this day. They're on kind of their last tour, perpetual tour for the time being. Great band from Los Angeles. I've seen them maybe a dozen times over the years, and they're still a great band. And John Doe and Exene Cervenka, those harmonies, sort of atonal, you know, not perfectly in tune, but that's what's great about this band. What a wonderful band. X, coming in at number 16. Coming in at number 15, and to me, one of the greatest live albums, who made possibly the best live album in the 1970s, and that's Little Feat. This is probably the best live album of the 1970s, Waiting for Columbus. Came out of Los Angeles, California, never quite became big. An important band, a great band, a tight band. They have a little of that New Orleans funk thing going of rock and roll, led by Lowell George singing, Paul Bourret in there. You got Bill Payne on keyboards. They're still together. Obviously, Lowell George died in 1979, but the records up and including the Lowell George solo album in 1979 are wonderful records. There's been a great reissue program coming out, expanded in some cases. But if you have no Little Feat, this is the one to get. It's a tight record. It's a wonderful record. I have 3 copies. This is my original hype stickered copy. I have an early MoFi, or a 79 MoFi is excellent. And there was a wonderful reissue last year or the year before, which is just really great sounding. You can't do this record wrong. Any version you pick up is going to sound great, but it's such a wonderful recording. The Expanded has some stuff, more stuff with Tower of Power horn section. They're a great band. Didn't include them from Oakland, California, but a great soul funk band. Great American band, not included here. But Little Feat is an important band, and I think should be in everybody's collection. And they seem to be forgotten by a segment of the population these days. Coming number 14, a band also from California, from the Los Angeles area, and that is War. This is The World is a Ghetto. They got kind of their claim to fame started when Eric Burton of the Animals, Eric Burton, kind of hooked up with them, and they did a series of 3 or 4 albums. Eric Burton Declares War, and War backing up. Then they went their own, and they exceeded expectations. They exceeded those records and made a great thing of kind of soul, Latin music, and rock and roll mixed up. On here, you know, you have that great harmonica playing, that really melodic harmonica playing by Lee Oskar on here. It isn't kind of the screeching thing you get occasionally from Bob Dylan or some of the other folk singers. It's just a really wonderful, wonderful sound. If nothing else, get their greatest hits record. But this is great. Cisco Kid, The World is a Ghetto. They had great hooks to their songs and long kind of jammy, there's a little jazz influence in there, but an amazing band from, I believe they're from East Los Angeles as well. But this is War, coming in at number 14. Coming number 13, sticking with the whole East LA thing, To me, this is one of my all-time favorite bands, and it's a band I think that originally had one member change, but for 40 plus years, they've been together, intact, and great music, made great music. And from East LA, and that's Los Lobos. This is their wonderful album, Kiko. Again, another band that hasn't made a bad record, although I prefer everything. The last couple records are okay, but all the first records, the 2 or 3 records they did sung in Spanish, Americans, Mexican, descent, wonderful band. Some of their stuff produced by T-Bone Burnett, also Mitchell Froome, and Los Lobos. Is this their best? It doesn't matter. This is one of their best, but they had this great hybrid sound of rootsy music, Tejana music, Mexican music, rock and roll, blues, soul. When you see them, they're in a way like a jam band. They'll do these great covers of everything from Tomorrow Never Knows. So they're a little like the Dead, where they mix in a couple of old songs they rearranged and works for them. So if you ever get a chance to see them live, they're still performing. Los Lobos coming in at number 13. Coming in at number 12, the Ramones. The first punk band possibly, again, from the CBGB scene, signed to Sire Records by Seymour Stein. This is their debut. A great band, an important band. They just made punk accessible, or they made it. It's basically fast surf music, really, when you kind of listen to it from 2024, looking back to 1976. What a great record. Saw them many times back then. A favorite of mine, the Ramones. Coming in number 11, again, the story is everyone had this album, and everybody who listened to this album started a band. It supposedly only sold 6,000 copies back in 1967, but is the Velvet Underground. Very influential band, more influential than records they sold. Of course, it's been in print, and over the years, it sold more and more records. The cover designed, wonderful cover, designed by Andy Warhol, supposedly produced by Andy Warhol. Yeah, I'm sure he had a good engineer here and worked with Lou Reed and John Cale and Maureen Tucker and Sterling Morrison, and with Nico, the model, who sings kind of off-key, but that's sort of the beauty of this. Now we're into the top 10. Coming at number 10, the Allman Brothers. I don't think you can do an American list without including the Allman Brothers, at least my generation, but I think other generations should listen to this music. This is when Duane Allman was still in the band. Tragic accident. They had 2 tragic accidents in their career, but they went on after this. This is live at the Fillmore East with these wonderful cover photographs by the great photographer Jim Marshall. Again, Eat a Peach, I think, was one of the first ones I got into, then went back and part of the same session. This is the one to get if you have to get one. But even Brothers and Sisters with Ramblin' Man, post Duane Allman. But Duane Allman was a great session musician, working on a lot of Stax records, great funky, great kind of soulful, bluesy rock and roll player. But this is a perfect album. The expanded box set 4 LPs that has all the show songs is a wonderful addition. This is an original Capricorn edition with the pink label, and it's a wonderful record. Necessary in any collection, in my opinion. Coming up at number 9, probably the band that I got more into soul and funk. Now, of course, I grew up with Motown and the great Motown singles, but remember, those weren't really bands, The Supremes, the Temptations, all those bands had backup musicians, the Funk Brothers backing them up. So a lot of us, or all of us, are not including them. Listen to John Digital Gramophone's video. He really gets in deep and talking about that more than I'm going to hear. But probably the band that got me into it, and was massive for a while. And he showed his greatest hits, but that's Sly and the Family Stone. What a great band. Now, some would say, well, why don't you just include Sly Stone, not as a band, just him? Because really, the essence of him is his band. Yes, he did stuff without the Family Stone later, but the essence of this, Stand Here, I Want to Take You Higher, Sing a Simple Song, Everyday People, and the great 14-minute version of Sex Machine on here, which is great wah-wah pedal, psychedelic stuff. Sly and the Family Stone coming in at number 9. Coming in at number 8, The Doors. I think The Doors are extremely important Jim Morrison, Burn Brightly, they lasted, what, from 67 to 71-ish. The Doors, and this debut with Light My Fire changed everything. It was a long single. Most stations on AM played the long version. There was an edit version too, but the long versions of The End on here, that song, just a great trio with a great, interesting poet vocalist, The Doors. The debut, I hear this all over the radio in 67, 68. One of the great records of 1967. They call The Summer of Love with this and the Airplane and the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, amongst other things, Jimi Hendrix too. Coming in number 7, again, another band that you really need to include, I think, in an American top 25, the Beach Boys. Now, they have a tempestuous career later on. Is this the masterpiece? Possibly. It's the obvious choice to show, but this really wasn't that popular when it came out. It became more important later. The whole quote that Paul McCartney says is his favorite album, and it really perpetuated the intensity of this record, but it is a beautiful record. I think Good Vibrations is one of the best songs ever, especially of the 1960s. But Brian Wilson and the brothers, and of course the cousin and the friend, the harmony vocals on this, you can't deny how great they were. The Wrecking Crew were backing them up on all these other things, and maybe some would consider them a vocal band because of the Wrecking Crew, but they started out playing their instruments, and it really changed. And they did play, and the Wrecking Crew is all over this. So we change our tune depending on how we're presenting these things. But the Beach Boys are essential, and especially this album, but several other albums I think are essential records. And coming from the Northern California, I wasn't a real surfer fan, but when I heard Good Vibrations, which unfortunately is not on that record, things changed. Coming number 6, the Grateful Dead. Obviously, San Francisco band. They changed things. They didn't sell a lot of records initially. They became one of the great live touring jam bands with a following that you could never, ever have predicted. This is Europe 72. I think for people who've never owned a Grateful Dead record, this is the perfect place to start because you get the best of the live stuff, you get the best of their songwriting, and there's other live albums that people, Grateful Dead freaks, will consider better. There is a lot of fixes on this, studio overdubs, music and vocals, which they fix so they would stay on key, but that's the beauty of this record. You get some of those great songs from the late 60s and 1970s especially on here and doing these great songs. Triple record set from that great tour. This to me is the one, but there's so many records that I could suggest from the Grateful Dead. Important band, and they're coming in number 6. Now the top 5. Number 5, a great American band and another band from that great late 70s CBGB scene, the Talking Heads. Talking Heads 77, their debut album. This is such a good record. They would definitely expand and get more percussive and add different textures and things when they worked with Eno. This is a perfect record. Obviously, Psycho Killer came out of the gates, but they're this quirky art school combination of things you never thought that this band would ever be as big as they were. David Byrne's always the iconic central figure because of that kind of tenor, interesting, quirky voice. Their art aesthetic on their album art and their productions, and obviously Stop Making Sense, The Big Suit, what a great live recorded record that was. But the Talking Heads are such an important band. I mean, every record they make is worth checking out. I'm listening to this a lot because there's a reissue that just came out or coming out. But Talking Heads 77, Talking Heads coming in at number 5. Number 4, my favorite band from the whole San Francisco scene is the Jefferson Airplane, and this is number 4. This is Volunteers, their 1969, probably their last great record, their most overtly political record. It's an intense record. It's a beautiful record. There's a great folky kind of cover of Good Shepherd that Jorma Kaukonen sings. We Can Be Together, this great anthem, as well as Volunteers. The great anthem. If the Grateful Dead had vocals like this, half the vocals of Grace Slick and Marty Ballin, and then even Paul Kantner, who's like the next vocalist, and even Yorma in a way. But the combination of Grace Lick and Marty Ballin just soars on this record. Just a wonderful, wonderful record. They did have some excursions of experimental stuff with After Bathing at Baxter's, the end of 1967. They also, the only band I know that has a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the gatefold, in case you're hungry. But they burned brightly. 67 to 69, 70, they were a great live band. And then they just dispersed and did side projects, and they kind of lost their focus. And that's when the Grateful Dead really kind of superseded them. Now, the Grateful Dead were great live too, but they were like kind of meandering band, experimenting, more experimental in their live shows. But the Grateful Dead's live weren't as good as the Jefferson Airplane live in 1967 and 1968. I was there. I know. My opinion, and even 69 maybe, that started changing there. Volunteers of America, the Jefferson Airplane from 1969. Jefferson Airplane number 4. Coming at number 3, probably the band that really kind of started the indie thing where record companies were signing bands, independent bands, doing some interesting things, from Athens, Georgia, REM. Now, this is their debut album. They did have a EP prior to this, produced by Mitch Easter out of the Athens, Georgia scene there with the B-52s. That would have been a good band, but I did not include them either. Murmur. You got this great band, 4 members that wears their influence on their sleeve. Totally original, yet you can see and hear their influences. Obviously, with Peter Buck's Rickenbacker 12-string twangy sound, that jingle jangle thing right off of something from The Byrds or Tom Petty. In that, you got this great vocals of Michael Stipe, who, you know, you almost didn't understand anything he said initially, and a great lyricist, just a great tight band. I saw them live maybe 10 times early on, and they were fantastic. Mike Mills is, you know, not the greatest lead singer, but the harmonies he did on those vocals was just stupendous, and a great rhythm section with Barry, who would eventually leave because he had a brain aneurysm, I believe. I could pick any REM record and enjoy it. Automatic for the People might be my favorite. You know, the Warner Brothers years, there's a whole group of people that really want to battle the Warner Brothers versus the IRS indie years. I don't think, why do you have to battle them? They're all great. They've evolved. They were, you know, very rootsy, very what we now call Americana too, but a great rock band. Opening up with Radio Free Europe is such a great song. Pilgrimage on here, Catapult. I mean, there's not a bad song on this album, and it's a really driving album. And, you know, they wouldn't be the most experimental, but they really had some great hooks on later on, too. Even Shiny Happy People, which some people love to hate, was a great song. Orange Crush, the Warner Brothers years. But again, Automatic for the People, my favorite. Something about that. And, of course, just prior to that, Losing My Religion. I just love that record. I remember my son was just a year and a half old, maybe, and I was running around holding him up, listening to Losing My Religion. A very important moment that I really, like a sense memory thing that I go back to when I hear that song every time. My young son. Beautiful moment, beautiful moment. Coming in number 2, a band that came from the Bay Area, from the East Bay, from El Cerrito, California, which is just north of Berkeley. And they didn't sound like anything else out of the San Francisco scene, of the psychedelic scene. I first saw them in 1968 at this outdoor festival, San Francisco International Pop Festival in Alameda, and I bought their first album because of their version of Susie Q, a cover of Susie Q, and that's Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now, this ain't that album, but they had a run of albums. In 1969, they had 3 albums. They had the most AM hits of any Bay Area band. They were the biggest band coming out of the Bay Area in the 1960s. An incredible, incredible just array of music and top singles and hooks and wonderful records. I like this because there's a, you know, Down on the Corner, of course, is a great opening song. It Came Out of the Sky. I think I first heard Cotton Fields here, a cover of that kind of blues, soulful blues, gospel-y song. But side 2, one of the great Vietnam protest songs is Fortunate Son. That opens up side two. I have a sense memory of being in a diner on Market Street in San Francisco where they have the jukeboxes at the bar. Every table or had a section of those top jukeboxes, the little ones you flip through. And for whatever reason, Fortunate Son got stuck. And while we were there, that song played at least 15 times, and I loved it. I think people were getting crazy about it. But Midnight Special, of course, another cover. But this isn't necessarily my favorite album, but it's one I go to. I love the sound of this. Fantasy Records, Creedence Clearwater Revival, one of the greatest American bands. And they hold up to this day. Their songs are not dated. Their songs are tight. They're most of them, except maybe on the first album in a couple places, are like 3-minute songs or less. They're a great singles band, but they're a great albums band. So as much as you want to just get the greatest hits, get their entire catalog, at least up to, maybe stop at Pendulum or stop before Pendulum. But Creedence Clearwater Revival, the second greatest American band. That leaves only one. And those of you who watch my channel know already what my number one band is. If you've heard me talk about many times my top 3 bands ever, 2 of them are British. I emphasize British. I love the Brits. I love music from the UK. My number one band, The Byrds, Fifth Dimension. The song here, 8 Miles High, possibly the first psychedelic song ever, at least popularized on the charts. What a great song. Unfortunately, Gene Clark leaves the band, around this time, just prior to this, which is unfortunate. He's a great songwriter. But what's great about the Byrds, they were, touted as like America's answer to the Beatles. 1965, they were the ones that took the Dylan song, Mr. Tambourine Man, then took Turn, 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 the Pete Seeger song, with lyrics from the book of Ecclesiastes, and made it into folk rock. Dylan was very influenced by bands like the Beatles, but especially the Byrds doing his songs. Tom Wilson, the producer, would take a Simon and Garfunkel song, Sounds of Silence, while one was in England and one was in back to college, and he would add a rhythm and drum track and make that a folk rock song, making it a huge hit. The Byrds were the ones. And Roger McGuinn, watching George Harrison in A Hard Day's Night and picking up a Rickenbacker 12-string and really made that sound. He bettered the playing of a Rickenbacker 12-string over George Harrison, but he made it the sound of the Byrds. And those soaring harmonies by McGuinn, by David Crosby, and by Gene Clark were just amazing. Now, when they went through changes, they did one of the first country albums with Sweetheart of the Rodeo, so that was influential. Again, not a big seller at the time. Then they became a different band with only Roger McGuinn as the Byrds, and with Clarence White and Gene Parsons, not to be confused with Graham Parsons, and Skip Batton on bass. And that later period, they became a better live band. If you hear the music on Untitled, they're kind of jammy. They were tight. I mean, Clarence White's playing is amazing. I saw the band in 1967, right after Gene Clark left, and they were great. But maybe part of it is amplification. I did see them later, the newer band. They were a tighter band. I wish they had continued. I wish they had gone on. The Byrds flew just beautifully, doing some of their old songs. They didn't quite have the harmonies of the early Byrds, but they were a tight band. Maybe they needed another singer to augment Roger McGuinn, so you didn't have all Roger. They needed like a Gene Clark or a David Crosby type. But they are one of the great American bands out of the Los Angeles area, coming out of the folk scene, merging into the psychedelic scene, merging into cosmic cowboy music. And they fused so many areas, parallel with the Beatles in the 1960s and 65, 66, and 67 especially. Even that country version, that wonderful, perfect song on Untitled, on the studio album of that 2-record set, One was live, one was studio. Chestnut Mare. What an amazing piece of music. And listen closely to the haunting, beautiful interplay of Clarence White's acoustic guitar playing. One of the great American bands, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest American band here. So that's my presentation, 25 American bands. Comments below. Go check the other ones. They're floating around YouTube. Everyone's got a different take on it. It's a fun one. Mazzy loves you.